There are moments in life that reveal who a person truly is. Not when cameras are flashing, not when millions are laughing at a joke, but when everything suddenly becomes quiet. For decades, Ricky Gervais built a reputation as the man who was impossible to silence. He challenged celebrities, mocked billionaires, questioned religion, and stood on the biggest stages in entertainment without ever worrying about who might be offended. People knew him as fearless, brutally honest, and completely unpredictable. But in 2026, something unusual happened. His social media accounts, normally filled with sharp humor and sarcastic observations, went silent. Fans noticed immediately. Days passed without a joke or a controversial opinion. Then someone politely asked how Jane Fallon was doing. Ricky replied with just 4 simple words. "She's doing well. Thanks." No comedy, no performance, no punchline. For a man who always seemed to have something to say, those few words carried more emotion than an entire stand-up special. Because behind one of the world's most famous comedians has always been one woman who never wanted the spotlight. Her name is Jane Fallon. Long before the awards, Netflix deals, sold-out arenas, and Golden Globe headlines, Ricky Gervais was simply a confused university student with big dreams and absolutely no clear direction in life. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. In fact, he wasn't even sure what he wanted to become. And that was exactly when Jane met him. The year was 1982 at University College London. Ricky had already abandoned biology for philosophy, convinced that life should be explored rather than memorized from textbooks. Jane was studying history, intelligent, independent, and quietly ambitious. Neither of them could have imagined that they were beginning one of the longest relationships in modern entertainment. Unlike Hollywood romances built on premieres and magazine covers, their relationship started with ordinary conversations, cheap meals, shared bus rides, and dreams that seemed impossible. Money was almost non-existent. After graduation, they moved into a tiny rented room in King's Cross, an area of London that looked nothing like the fashionable neighborhood it would later become. The apartment was so small that Ricky would later joke he could reach the refrigerator without getting out of bed. There were no luxury vacations, no expensive furniture, no celebrity friends, just 2 young people trying to build a future together. While many couples struggle through uncertainty, Jane never appeared to doubt Ricky's potential. He had already tried becoming a pop singer with a synth-pop band called Siona Dancing. The dream ended almost as quickly as it started when the records failed to sell. Most people would have accepted defeat. Jane didn't. She never told him to settle for a safer career or abandon his creative ambitions. Instead, she kept repeating something incredibly simple. "You're funny." At the time, almost nobody else was saying it. Ricky worked ordinary office jobs, managed bands that found success only after he left, and spent years wondering whether life had already chosen his path for him. But every evening he returned home to someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. Years later, Ricky would admit that Jane was still the first person whose opinion mattered whenever he created something new. If she laughed, he knew it worked. If she didn't, he kept rewriting. It wasn't because she was trying to protect his feelings. It was because she always told him the truth. That honesty became the foundation of a relationship that would survive fame, controversy, fortune, and 4 decades in the public eye. And while the world would eventually know Ricky Gervais as one of the biggest comedians on the planet, Jane Fallon would quietly build an extraordinary career of her own. She never wanted to be known as someone's girlfriend. She wanted her own identity, and Ricky admired her for it. As the years passed, their tiny apartment slowly transformed into a comfortable home, but one thing never changed. Every major decision, every script, every risky career move, every joke that millions of people would eventually hear, was first tested in front of one person, the woman who had been there before anyone else believed. The woman Ricky Gervais would later describe, without hesitation, as the only love of his life. Neither of them knew it yet, but the biggest opportunity of Ricky's career was only a few years away, and it would completely change their lives forever. For almost 10 years, Ricky Gervais looked like someone whose biggest dreams had already slipped away. His brief career as a pop singer had ended almost before it began. Record labels lost interest, songs disappeared without making an impact, and the fame he imagined as a young man never arrived. Instead of performing on stage, he found himself sitting behind office desks, filling out paperwork and attending meetings that seemed to last forever. To many people, that would have looked like failure. But Jane Fallon saw something different. She saw a man who could make an entire room laugh without trying. Friends would visit their apartment and leave talking about Ricky's stories, his observations, and his ability to turn ordinary moments into unforgettable conversations. Jane noticed it long before television executives ever would. While she continued building a successful career in British television as a script editor and producer, Ricky kept searching for his place. He wasn't chasing celebrity anymore. He simply wanted to create something honest. That opportunity arrived in the late 1990s when he joined XFM, a small London radio station. It wasn't a glamorous job. He worked behind the scenes, learning as he went and experimenting with ideas that traditional broadcasters would probably reject. There he met Stephen Merchant, another creative mind who saw comedy in everyday life instead of traditional punchlines. Their conversations quickly turned into brainstorming sessions. They talked about awkward managers, uncomfortable meetings, forced office parties, and people desperately trying to impress coworkers who secretly couldn't stand them. The idea seemed strangely simple. What if the funniest character on television wasn't a hero, but an ordinary office manager who believed he was everyone's best friend while making everyone uncomfortable? That character became David Brent. Ricky didn't play him as a villain. He played him as someone painfully human, someone who wanted approval so badly that he never realized he was embarrassing himself. When they pitched the project, many people didn't understand it. There was no laugh track, no glamorous setting, no perfect television family, just uncomfortable silence and painfully realistic conversations. Even after the show premiered, the audience numbers were disappointing. Executives questioned whether it had been a mistake. Some reports suggested it was one of the BBC's lowest-rated new comedy programs. Most creators would have panicked. Ricky didn't. Years of failure had taught him something valuable. If success finally arrived, it had to arrive on his own terms. And behind that confidence stood Jane. She had already watched him survive disappointment after disappointment. One failed music career, one ordinary office job, one uncertain future. She never once suggested giving up. Instead, she continued doing exactly what she had always done, listening, encouraging, and telling him the truth. Slowly, something remarkable happened. People started recommending The Office to friends. Critics praised its originality. Viewers recognized pieces of their own lives inside the awkward humor. The show stopped being a risky experiment and became a cultural phenomenon. Soon it was winning awards across Britain. Then America noticed. The series was adapted for NBC and eventually became one of the most successful sitcoms ever produced, introducing millions of new viewers to a style of comedy that felt completely different from anything else on television. Almost overnight, Ricky Gervais transformed from an unknown office worker into one of the most influential comedians in the world. Hollywood invited him. Streaming platforms competed for him. Award shows wanted him on stage because nobody else could create headlines the way he could. But fame changed surprisingly little inside his home. He still trusted one opinion above every critic, producer, executive, or journalist. Jane's. In interviews, Ricky has repeatedly admitted that before releasing a script or developing a new idea, he wants Jane to read it first. Not because she always agrees with him, because she doesn't. If something isn't funny, she says so. If a story doesn't work, she tells him immediately. There is no celebrity treatment, no pretending, no protecting his ego, only honesty. Perhaps that's why, after more than 40 years together, their relationship still feels remarkably normal despite extraordinary success. While millions of people know Ricky Gervais as the fearless comedian who never backs down from controversy, the version that comes home every evening is simply a man sharing dinner with a woman who believed in him when almost nobody else did. And while the world celebrated his greatest achievements, another question followed them everywhere. One question they have been answering for decades. If they loved each other so much, Why did they never get married? By the time Ricky Gervais became one of the biggest names in comedy, people had started asking the same question over and over again. When are you and Jane getting married? It sounded like the obvious next step. They had already spent decades together, survived financial struggles, built successful careers, and shared a life that looked stronger than many celebrity marriages. But their answer never changed. They didn't feel they needed a ceremony to prove anything. Ricky once joked that they were married in every possible way except on paper. They shared a home, shared their lives, shared their success, and trusted each other completely. For them, a wedding would simply be a party, not a definition of commitment. Jane agreed. She explained in interviews that if either of them had desperately wanted marriage, they would have done it years ago. Neither of them felt that a legal document could improve something that was already working perfectly. Their relationship became increasingly rare in the entertainment industry. While headlines constantly reported celebrity breakups, surprise divorces, and public scandals, Ricky and Jane quietly continued living the same life they had started as university students. No dramatic interviews, no public arguments, no attention-seeking romance, just consistency. Another decision that fascinated people was their choice not to have children. Once again, they answered the question honestly instead of giving the expected response. They simply said they never felt the desire to become parents. It wasn't because they disliked children. It wasn't because they were too busy. It was a decision they made together, without pressure or regret. Instead, their home became famous for another reason: cats. Anyone who follows Ricky Gervais online knows his love for animals is genuine and deeply personal. His social media pages are filled with rescue stories, wildlife campaigns, and pictures of the cats he and Jane adore. To many fans, it seemed like a small detail. But for Ricky, kindness toward animals reflected something much bigger. He has often said that compassion is one of the most important qualities a person can have. Behind the comedian, known for fearless jokes, is someone who has donated millions to animal charities and regularly uses his platform to support organizations protecting wildlife around the world. Meanwhile, Jane quietly reinvented her own career. After years as a successful television producer, she decided to take an entirely different path. She became a novelist. Many expected people to buy her books because she was connected to Ricky Gervais. Instead, readers stayed because the stories were genuinely entertaining. Her first novel became a bestseller, followed by another, and another, until she had built an impressive literary career completely independent of her famous partner. Ricky couldn't have been happier. In interviews, he has proudly described Jane as smarter than him and often admits that she notices details he completely misses. Their relationship has never been about competition. It's been about encouragement. Success for one has always felt like success for both. At the same time, Ricky's own career continued reaching incredible heights. Extras earned critical acclaim. Derek surprised audiences by showing a softer and more emotional side of his acting. Then came Afterlife, a series that blended grief, humor, and hope in a way that connected with millions of viewers across the world. Many people expected Ricky Gervais to create another outrageous comedy. Instead, he delivered one of the most emotional performances of his career. The story followed a man trying to rebuild his life after losing the person he loved most. Fans noticed something different. Behind every joke was genuine vulnerability. Behind every sarcastic comment was loneliness. And behind every emotional scene was an understanding of what long-term love actually means. Whether intentional or not, many viewers believe the series reflected Ricky's own appreciation for the quiet relationship that had shaped his entire adult life. While Hollywood celebrated him for making audiences laugh, those closest to him understood that the greatest source of stability in his life had never changed. For more than 40 years, Jane Fallon remained the first person he wanted to talk to after every success and every disappointment. Then, in early 2026, that peaceful routine was suddenly interrupted. A routine medical appointment would bring news that neither of them had expected, and for the first time in decades, the comedian who always had an answer would choose silence instead. Everything about that morning looked completely ordinary. Jane Fallon wasn't feeling sick. She wasn't in pain. She had no reason to believe anything was wrong. Like millions of people every year, she simply attended a routine medical screening, expecting to go home and forget about it. Instead, doctors noticed something that required a closer look. More scans followed, then another appointment, then a biopsy. Days of waiting turned into weeks of uncertainty. Finally, Jane received news that instantly changed the rhythm of life she and Ricky Gervais had shared for more than 4 decades. She had early-stage breast cancer. Fortunately, doctors were optimistic. The cancer had been detected very early, giving her an excellent prognosis and a clear treatment plan. But even good news can be frightening when it arrives with a word that changes everything. Instead of hiding the situation, Jane chose honesty. She shared the diagnosis with her followers in a way that perfectly reflected her personality. Alongside a smiling selfie, she calmly explained that she was receiving outstanding medical care and that everything was expected to be fine. Then, in classic Jane Fallon fashion, she added humor. She introduced a stuffed teddy bear wearing a toy stethoscope and posted a picture of her beloved cat dressed as a tiny nurse. It was her way of reminding people that fear and laughter can exist at the same time. Thousands of messages flooded in from readers, fellow authors, actors, and fans around the world. Everyone wished her strength. Everyone hoped for a full recovery. And while Jane was openly reassuring everyone else, people noticed something unusual about Ricky Gervais. He disappeared. For a man who regularly shared jokes, opinions, and observations with millions of followers, the silence was impossible to miss. Days passed without a single sarcastic comment. No controversial headlines. No comedy clips. No arguments with strangers online. Just quiet. Eventually, one fan gently asked the question everyone wanted answered. "How is Jane doing?" Ricky responded with only a few simple words. "She's doing well. Thank you." Nothing more. No long explanation. No emotional speech. No attempt to turn a deeply personal moment into public content. For someone whose career has been built on saying exactly what he thinks, that silence may have been the loudest statement he has ever made. It reflected something fans had always suspected. Behind the fearless comedian is an intensely private man who protects the people he loves. For over 40 years, Ricky Gervais and Jane Fallon have ignored almost every expectation placed upon them. They never married because they didn't feel they had to. They never had children because they chose a different life together. They built independent careers, celebrated each other's success, supported one another through failure, and quietly proved that commitment doesn't need headlines to be real. In an industry where relationships often disappear as quickly as they begin, theirs has lasted longer than many Hollywood careers. Perhaps that is why so many people connect with their story. It isn't built on grand romantic gestures or expensive ceremonies. It's built on ordinary mornings, shared meals, honest conversations, mutual respect, and choosing the same person again and again for more than 40 years. Ricky Gervais has made millions of people laugh. He has challenged celebrities, collected awards, sold out arenas, and created television shows that changed modern comedy forever. But if you look closely at the story behind all of those achievements, one constant remains. A university student who believed in a struggling musician before anyone else did. A partner who encouraged him through failed careers, uncertain years, and impossible dreams. A woman whose quiet support helped shape one of the most successful comedians in the world. Maybe that's why, after all the success and controversy, the most remarkable thing about Ricky Gervais isn't a Golden Globe speech or a Netflix special. It's the simple decision he made in 1982 and never changed. To keep choosing Jane Fallon every single day. And perhaps that's the real definition of love. Not the wedding, not the photographs, not the public promises, but showing up, staying loyal, and standing beside the same person through uncertainty, success, illness, and time. Because some love stories don't need a ceremony to become legendary. They simply need 2 people who never let go. If you enjoy this documentary, please like, comment, and subscribe for this type of content. Thanks for watching.